Hello and welcome to the Luke Lunchtime Takeaway. We're near the end of the story now as we come to the trial of Jesus. Today's Maundy Thursday and we're thinking about the final steps towards his crucifixion. Luke has been recording his Gospels really to answer this big question: who is Jesus and why did he come? And now as we get to his trial, that becomes an even bigger issue than ever. But the interesting thing about his trial is that Luke uses a particular structure to tell the story. He works in threes. He centers it around three characters, and we're going to take each of them in turn. And there are three statements made by each of those three characters. So let's work through the story, because what Luke is trying to do here is to show to us that Jesus is an innocent man, and that as he goes to his death, there is no reason why he should die. Therefore, he must be dying in the place of others. He must be a redeemer. First of all, he starts with the character of Peter. Jesus is arrested and he's taken to the house of the chief priests. And there's a courtyard and there's a fire burning in the courtyard. And Peter follows at a distance. He keeps Jesus in sight and he gathers with other people around this fire in the dark of the night and watches as Jesus is being held some way over there. And he just keeps an eye on Jesus. But people are also keeping an eye on him. Maybe somebody puts a log on the fire and the flames roar up and they see Peter's face. And a servant girl accuses him and she says, "This man also was with him." And Peter replies, "Woman, I do not know him." And then in a little while afterwards, someone says, "You also are one of them." And Peter replies emphatically, "Man, I am not." And then a little bit of time passes, and an hour later, somebody says, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." And Peter replies, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." 3 times, Peter pretended to be nothing to do with Jesus, except that, of course, at the Last Supper, he had told Jesus he was willing to go with him to prison and to death. And now he denies him, and the 3rd time he denies him, the cockerel crows. Exactly as Jesus had predicted when he spoke to Peter earlier in the evening. And when Peter heard the cockerel crow, Jesus turned in the courtyard and glanced in Peter's direction. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. What a contrast. It turns out that Peter is like the rest of us after all. He has a sinful nature, just as we do. He's a failure. He doesn't have the strength to go with Jesus all the way to the cross. He buckles under pressure. Now, why does Luke tell us that story? He does it to set up for us the innocence of Jesus. We stand with Peter, and we are the contrast to Jesus who dies in our place. Now, that's the first of the 3 characters and the first 3 statements of the story. The second part of the story, Luke takes us into the conversation that Jesus has with his accusers. And they keep on putting questions to him and he refuses to rise to the bait. So first, the men who are holding him under guard, they blindfold him and then they start to strike him and beat him. And they say, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" Now, Jesus could have answered them, and he could have said who it was, and that would have scared them, wouldn't it? And established his authority. But frankly, he has just seen one of his prophecies fulfilled in the crowing of the cockerel, and they didn't appreciate that. So he doesn't rise to their challenge. He's not just someone who does magic at their command. Second, at daybreak, now that the sun is rising, the elders come to him and they put to him the big question. Are you the Christ? Tell us. And what they mean by that is, Jesus, are you an earthly king? Are you claiming to be the Messiah king who is coming to re-establish the kingdom of Israel? And Jesus has not come to do that, and he's not going to fit into their tidy little pigeonhole. So he says, if I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. He's not going to be trapped into saying something that they will misunderstand. So he says, but from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. In other words, they must stop thinking about him as just an earthly king in Jerusalem. And they must start realizing that he's going to his cross to suffer, as the Son of Man must. And then when he's died and he's risen and ascended into heaven, he will be the glorious Son of Man who reigns in heaven and is seated on the throne of God. And they realize, of course, that he's making the bigger claim. And so their third comment is this: "Are you the Son of God then?" And Jesus replies, "You say that I am." These men accusing Jesus just think he's a cheap rabbi from Galilee, and he can't even prophesy when they tell him to, and so they're rejecting him as a charlatan. But Jesus, by admitting that he's the Son of God, is putting the real claim at the heart of his trial. He is the Son of God, come from heaven. He is about to suffer. Woe betide those who accuse him and shout, "Crucify." Now, at the next stage of the trial, the chief priests and their officers take Jesus to Pilate, the Roman governor. And there's a lot of shuttling to and fro between Pilate and King Herod of Galilee, who happens to be in town on that particular evening. The Jewish council take Jesus to Pilate and they change their charge. This is what they say: "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Now, Pilate is the third character in our set of three, and he makes three statements that Luke records. And I'm sure they're there for emphasis and they're very important. They've brought Jesus to him, he's heard their case against him, and he says, "I find no guilt in this man." After he's sent him off to King Herod, and Jesus has refused to do any miracles for Herod when he demanded them, Jesus comes back to Pilate, and Pilate says a second time, "Look, nothing deserving of death has been done by him." Now, every year at the Feast of the Passover, the Roman governor released one prisoner to the people that they requested. And so he says to them, "Look, Jesus is innocent. Why don't I release Jesus to you?" But they shout, "No, crucify him, crucify him." And Pilate says, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death." But they insist that Jesus must die and that Barabbas, who was a terrorist, an insurrectionist, must be the one who was released. And I'm sure Luke records that to drive home the point that the guilty go free and the innocent Son of God is the one who is punished. So this is a story of three characters, and three times the first character, Peter, denies Jesus, showing that we mere humans are too weak to save ourselves and we're in too much of a muddle and our lives are hopeless. We will always fail. We cannot impress God. And then he three times shows Jesus refusing to conform to the little categories of those who accuse him, because he cannot be explained away merely as a delusional prophet. He is the Son of God, and that is who they are accusing. And just to underline it, Pilate says three times, "This man is innocent. There is no reason why I should condemn him." And Luke is telling us, therefore, that the man who is going to his death is the Son of God. He is perfect. He is holy. He is eternal. He is the very last person who should be crucified. And yet he is willingly going to bear our condemnation and make it possible for us to receive redemption. He is going to die for people as weak and pathetic as Peter and you and me. This Easter, will you stop ruling him out of your life? Will you stop writing him off like they did and come and bow down to him and seek him and meet with him? This Easter, we need to know Jesus who was crucified. Now, the next two parts of the story we're going to be covering in our Good Friday service at 10:30 on Friday morning and in our Easter morning service. And then we'll come back for a couple more episodes of the Lunchtime Takeaway next week and the week after as Jesus explains his resurrection. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.